guys, welcome back to Paytology. It's a rough day to be a VIPKID teacher. So you may have heard that there are plenty of new regulations that are set about in China, and this includes many changes to their current foreign policy. So you may be thinking, well, I'm all the way in America. What could this possibly have to do with me? Well, pretty much nothing unless you are a overseas educational teacher for companies like VIPKID. So what happened? Let's break it down to better understand what's going on in China. So the private educational and tutoring sector of China is a $120 billion industry as of now. Just let that sink in for a minute. $120 billion industry just for private English tutoring and teaching. $120 billion. You guys, Taylor Swift is worth 400 million with an M. This is a $120 billion industry, just to put that into perspective. So before private English tutoring was reinstated in China, Chinese families were spending around $40,000 just for their kid to receive any sort of English tutoring. This also equals to about $200 for a private English class, which they were getting either weekly or bi-weekly, some even daily were paying for these classes. But then companies like VIPKID, GoGoKid, other ESL companies came along and offered this education to all Chinese families, including those in rural China that might not have access to higher education as the upper and middle class did, who might live closer to cities like Beijing. So these beautiful companies swept into China and were able to offer across the board, regardless of financial or demographic background, their child the ability to learn one-on-one with a native English speaker, such as myself and all of these other wonderful teachers on these platforms. So the Chinese government has never been a fan of these types of programs, and there are several reasons for this. One of the main reasons is a financial loss for the Chinese government. So these Chinese families in the upper and middle class were paying about $200 per educational one-on-one class with a Chinese English tutor. Then when these companies came in, places like VIPKID started offering much cheaper, much more affordable classes that were even better because they provided a native speaker to provide one-on-one classes, whereas before those $200 might have bought them a class of like 5 students and they weren't always promised a one-on-one class. Yikes. So now there are families in rural China without a lot of money that can pay for little Jimmy to get one-on-one teaching experience with an American English teacher, such as myself, which is a beautiful thing. And so is Sally, who lives in Beijing and comes from a family with a lot of money. They all have a little bit more of equal opportunity. So the Chinese government did not necessarily love this idea or approve of this idea because they want the upper and middle class to rise up in order to reproduce. So let me break that down a little bit further. So if you're anything like me, you're sitting there like, what does making babies have to do with the government's pull on private sectors of educational English tutoring or teaching from America? Great question. I'm glad you asked. So the first thing that the Chinese government aims to do, and I quote, is to reverse demographic decline while still ensuring population quality. Quality, not quantity. So in order to understand this, we have to think of the rural, lower class Chinese families kind of versus the upper middle class Chinese families. So when places like VIPKID came in and gave all of those kind of an equal playing ground for education, the upper middle class families had competition for their kids getting into higher level education, for competition on who gets better test grades, and that's a whole main issue of this Chinese law going into effect. So the Chinese government, as they had said, would like to ensure the population quality while still increasing the population quantity of their people. So what they mean by the population quality is they want to increase the numbers, the quantity of the middle and upper class. and not necessarily the rural poor families in the lower class of China. So this is very disheartening, especially as an American, where we all try to kind of lift each other up, kumbaya, and rally for one another. And the Chinese government just thinks about their population control in a very different light. So in order to ensure this population quality and quantity of their upper middle class, they must do something about the rural lower class that is now succeeding and rising up because of these private tutoring sectors. Because they're doing very well, they're also getting into higher level education opportunities that they beforehand didn't really have a shot at. So in order to do that, they are exerting direct influence on the private sectors, starting with tech, and that is a quote. Their first plan of action is to stop completely the outsourcing of American or basically non-Chinese teachers from overseas for working for these companies, and to stop any companies that are not based in China altogether. You might still be thinking, what does this have to do with population control and quality population control? Glad you asked. So essentially, if you take away all of these much cheaper learning opportunities from overseas, from companies like VIPKID, GoGoKid, etc., that are much more affordable, you kind of wipe out the rural, lower income families from learning English and from having those opportunities. And it doesn't change a whole lot for the middle class and the upper class, because they can most likely still afford those classes, even if the prices like skyrocket to $200 an hour or about $40,000 for K through 12 just for English. This takes away a lot of the educational competition and stress from the middle and upper class families in China, and adds a lot of stress to the rural communities. Which is exactly what the government wants for their citizens. So essentially, the upper and middle class being less stressed, having less educational competition for their children, so their children are probably getting in to a lot, higher universities, things like that. They are free to reproduce, is kind of what the Chinese government is thinking. So lower their stress. Let's give them the opportunities, and they will more likely reproduce than those in rural communities just fighting to pay for their current children's education. So the next thing the Chinese government aims to do is to ban all foreign influence. So anything that's not from China is not basically accepted in China. In addition to banning all non-Chinese cultural influences by closing down companies that outsource overseas, they're also hoping to discourage the children of China from applying to external universities overseas, because they want to keep them in China so that they cannot be influenced by outside voices. So hopefully that makes sense, just breaking down a little bit of how population control could have anything to do with companies like VIPKID. So now let's get into the nitty-gritty of what this actually means for companies like VIPKID. So what changes are actually being implemented? The first is that teaching can only be limited to a 30-minute class. There can no longer be hour-long classes, or as far as I know, grouping of 30-minute classes to make the learning longer. The next is that there is no tutoring past 9 p.m. There is an official learning curfew. Next is that there is no weekend tutoring, no holiday tutoring, and also no tutoring on school mandated breaks. All of these companies must also register as nonprofits now, and they're not allowed to do any investment fundraising or anything to do with investments at all. And no more company advertising at all. And of course, the most important change that must be implemented now is that there are no overseas teachers allowed to teach their students, and there are also no overseas courses. So you might be thinking to yourself, is there any good news in this at all? Yes, the great news is that VIPKID is still operational. There are just many changes that will come into play. But the good thing is that there's a lot of time that has to go on before a lot of these changes can be fully implemented. You also may not know that many of your students buy class packages, which means that they can buy up to a year's worth of classes at a time, pay for them all at once and then book them out as the year goes on. So these have not even been booked yet, many of them. So for my regular students, I know a couple of them have these packages, so I will be able to teach them in the months to come. The second great thing is that if you have a ton of booked out classes right now, you get to teach all of those classes. And I know a lot of teachers open up their schedule for months ahead of time. You get to teach all of the classes that you are booked for, so do not give up hope yet. As for trial classes, VIPKID came forward today and said that they will not be booking new trial classes as far as I understand, but that if you have trial classes booked already, which I do, I'm sure several other teachers do, you will be able to teach these. And then the Chinese teachers that will come over and kind of take over these students will be able to teach those students that choose to sign up for VIPKID. So it's not going to waste. Another big thing is that, of course, you will still get paid for the work you have done and the work that you have yet to do with VIPKID. And one of my favorite things that they said in their letter today to all of the teachers is that they will set up a way for students and teachers to have an official goodbye to each other. I thought this was very thoughtful that they would think about setting up a proper goodbye. I think that's very sweet for a company to consider. Because if you think about it, you're having this one-on-one time with these students every single week. I see some of mine up to 3 times a week for a half hour or hour at a time. And that's a lot of time to get to know these students. They feel like they're part of your family. And I think it would be terrible if we didn't have a proper way to, show them your love for them and how much you appreciate being able to have taught them for however many years or months that we've had the opportunity to do so. If you are a current VIPKID teacher, should you quit now? Should you stop opening classes? Should you not show up for your current classes? The answer is no. VIPKID is not going anywhere anytime soon. If you think about it, they have headquarters in Beijing, yes, but they also are located in San Francisco. They are not just a sole Chinese company. And they actually have programs opening in other countries. Obviously, this takes quite a bit of time, but myself and I'm sure thousands of other VIPKID teachers have taught kids who do not live in China. They're few and far between, but VIPKID released in their statement today that their goal is to put all of their investments and time in those countries. Aside from, obviously, China, they're still going to keep their connections with them, but they still want to expand into other territories and be able to take us with them. And of course, all of the other VIPKID programs that are not based in China, such as the Book Nook US Learning Reading Program, the Adult Program, all of the other programs that they have that are not based in China will continue to be, and you can still get booked for those as well. So this being said, you can still get booked from children from other areas of the world other than China. So it's very important to keep those bookings open so that when those opportunities do arise, you will get those bookings. So contracts, what is going to happen to all of our contracts? As long as you hit all the marks that you were supposed to, you didn't do 100 teacher no-shows, all of those good things, you will still have your contract renewed because they are not going anywhere anytime soon. One of the most promising things, I think, is that they are still also accepting referrals and are encouraging teachers to still bring in referrals. This also tells me that they are not disappearing. Thankfully, VIPKID did not put all of their eggs in one basket, and they really are not going anywhere, and they are here to stay. I've been following a lot of the teacher groups online, and it sounds like many are going to start doing teacher no-shows, not teaching their classes, showing up late, leaving early because they don't really care about future contracts, and that's totally fine, totally up to them, but those are the teachers that will not have an opportunity with VIPKID moving forward when they do go into other countries and other programs pop up. Something else to note is that there is about to be a mass exodus of VIPKID teachers off of the platform. They're looking at OutSchool, they're looking at brick and mortar jobs, they're looking at a ton of different opportunities that have nothing to do with VIPKID, which is yet another reason to stick around because there are going to be thousands of students on the platform needing to finish out their classes that they already paid for, and therefore you will probably get an increase in your bookings. And on the other hand, if we're thinking about why we're doing this, it's the children, it's the kids that we get to see every single day or night, all the way across the world, and they are still counting on you. They and their parents are just as upset about this as you are, and you might be thinking, well, there's Chinese teachers just coming to take over my job through this part of VIPKID in China. And that's true, but VIPKID is not happy about it. The kids are not happy about it. Their parents are not happy about it. And I know we are not happy about it, but those kids are still expecting you to show up and give it your all and just treat it like nothing happened during your classes. So what do we do now? My advice is to stick it out, stay with VIPKID, open up as many slots as possible to get all of those overflow students. You might be opening up a slot that another teacher has just canceled all of their classes for and quit the platform. And there will be a need for these students. They have to go somewhere. Their parents aren't just gonna waste all of these class packages that they already bought through the end of the year. So that's a beautiful thing for you. And I think just be open to any opportunities that come. If VIPKID emails you and invites you to the Book Nook program or the adult program, grab a hold of that. I also think getting certifications, if possible, is still a good thing to do because it shows them that you are still interested, you're still dedicated, and that you're sticking with them as well. So the bad news is pretty obvious, but I think it's important to weigh the good with the bad. We just talked about all of the good things that are still in place. And the main one is that VIPKID is not closing its door on American teachers, but they are bringing us with them, and their heart is to grow with us. But the bad news is that parents can no longer buy classes, they can no longer buy class packages, and so eventually we of course will have to say goodbye to our students. So I hope that this was helpful in breaking down a little bit of China's history, what's going on now with their new laws and regulations, and what happens to VIPKID teachers and what to do in the future and moving forward. So as always, if you have any questions, please leave them down below. My VIPKID code will be in the information description box. And otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.